Do you want to learn how to make special editions of your own books? Then keep watching and I'll show you how I make my DIY stencil edges. Hello everyone, my name is Sarah and I make these stencils to paint book edges. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to use them and paint your own books. Let's start with what materials you need. First, you need your book. Then you also need a manual sander, your chosen paint. I use water-based acrylic paint, a paintbrush, 2 boards, I recommend wooden boards, some clamps, a microfiber cloth, and of course your stencil. In this case, we're going to use the single shoe stencil. Let's start by prepping our book. The first step is to use the manual sander to smooth the edges of our book. This is a very important step and I really recommend you not skip it because if your book has uneven edges, the ink may bleed through the stencil. I also recommend pressing the book before using the sander so that you don't get any dust inside the pages. This step can be a bit time consuming, but it's very important to prevent ink bleeding. After you're done sanding, make sure to remove all the dust from your book. You can use your microfiber cloth or if needed, you can also use a vacuum cleaner. Now, we need to protect the book covers so we don't accidentally paint them. I'm just using regular paper to wrap them, but you can use any material you want. Now it's finally time to paint our book, but we need to press it again. I like to press the book with 4 clamps, but you only really need 2. It's very important to make sure at this stage that your book is not upside down before gluing your stencil. So take a look at the spine and make sure it's in the correct position before gluing your stencil. Now it's time to apply our stencil. The stencil should come with a clear transfer tape to help you position the stencil on the book. When you lift the transfer tape from the backing, make sure the entire stencil is glued to the transfer tape. Now we can apply it to the book. After applying it to the book, we need to press it down to make sure it's completely glued to the pages. We can remove the transfer tape and the stencil should stay on the book. I like to apply light coats of paint using a stippling motion to make sure I don't get any ink bleeding. I usually apply 2 light coats of paint and that is enough to cover the edges, but that may depend on whatever paint you're using. After the paint is completely dry, we can now remove our stencil. In this case, we have to open a section of the book in order to take the stencil off. After opening the pages, the stencil should be loose and you can either take it with your hands or using tweezers. Now we need to separate the rest of the pages. To do this, I open a few sections of the pages and flip through the corners in order to get them looser. In some cases, you may need to separate the pages one by one. This is the most time-consuming step, but you need to do it very carefully so you don't rip any of your pages. And this is the final result of the application of one of the individual stencils. Now let's see a more complex stencil that is bigger than your book. This stencil is bigger than our book, so we need to make sure we're positioning correctly before pressing it down. If you're using one of these stencils on a hardcover book, I recommend pressing only the pages and not the hardcover itself, so that this way you don't get ink bleeding on the sides. For more complex designs, I recommend lifting the transfer tape carefully and to make sure that none of the details are lifting from the book. In case they do, just put the transfer tape back down, press it and then lift again. After removing the tape, we need to press down on the stencil to make sure it's completely glued to the pages, especially on the sides. To paint, I also use the same method as the other stencil, using light coats of paint and a stippling motion. But with these stencils, I keep an eye on the sides to make sure the stencil is not lifting. This kind of stencil is easier to remove while the book is still pressed, but some small pieces of the stencil may be left on the book, and in order to remove them, we need to open the book like in the first example. This stencil requires a lot less paint than the other one, so the pages are a lot easier to separate. And this is the final result of the application of the rose pattern stencil. And that is how you use the stencils. You can get them at my Etsy shop, Sarah Designs, which is linked in the description. I hope this video was helpful, and if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!